The views expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Welcome to this edition of Insights, everybody. I'm your host, Marissa McKay, and today we're going to be talking about changes to the healthcare law here in the United States. Joining me is Mindy Johnson, who is an attorney from West Michigan, who made the drive up here today. How are you, Mindy?
Good. Thanks for having me, Marissa.
Good. All right. So I think you and I have talked about this at length. This is a very big and involved subject. It's not something that we can really take in stride in 30 minutes, but we will certainly try. So what is the healthcare reform? What is this? What is it in general?
Yeah, in the very basic terms, there are two specific requirements for the healthcare reform law. First is called the individual mandate, and the second is called the employer mandate. And they basically operate the same way. They are requirements that individuals and employers either purchase coverage for themselves or offer healthcare coverage to their employees.
Okay, and so this is going to affect not only how an individual could receive healthcare, but also somebody working for a larger company or even a smaller company.
Absolutely, and especially larger companies. The employer mandate is applicable to employers who employ 50 or more full-time employees.
Okay, wow, which 50 or more, 50 is a pretty small business, but 1,000 is a pretty large business. So it's certainly kind of across the table. And what have you seen so far from your research the past few years with this?
A lot of confusion, a lot of waiting. If you remember the healthcare reform law, it's called the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, healthcare reform. It was passed 3 years ago in 2010. And there was a lot of litigation about whether it was constitutional, and the cases went up through the Supreme Court of the United States, who issued an opinion last June and held that it was constitutional. So since then, a lot of people have been scrambling to get ready for the effective date, which is January 1, 2014, for most of the provisions, and just trying to strategize and determine how it's going to affect their business and what they can do to respond to it.
Right, and so that's about 7 months away at this point, so it's really not that far off in the grand scheme of business terms. So what do you think, what are some people doing? What are people coming to you guys with questions with?
A lot of questions about whether they are large employers. We represent a number of different businesses. So those are the people that we're talking to the most. And they need to know whether they're going to have to pay or play. Pay the penalty for not offering coverage or play along and offer insurance to their full-time employees. We're also seeing a lot of questions about how to calculate the full-time employee numbers. And there's a lot of different regulations related to that, which make it difficult. For example, a full-time employee is considered an employee who works an average of 30 hours a week, as opposed to 40 hours a week, which a lot of employers have treated them. So this requirement is going to require employers to cover a lot more employees than they had been before.
Okay, so do you think that from a business standpoint, some employers might be cutting hours in the future to probably save on healthcare costs?
Absolutely. We've talked to a number of different employers who are doing that. I've talked to a number of employers who are considering terminating the employees and hiring independent contractors. Also employers who are just cutting back on healthcare coverage completely just because it is such a financial strain on the company.
And do you think that, is that something legal that people can do? Is this sort of playing within the rules that they've been given?
Absolutely playing within the rules. It's a fine line to walk to try to strategize and work around some of the legal issues that are posing obstacles for the employer. But as long as you comply with those requirements, it's legitimate.
Right, and so some of these people now, if somebody was to be laid off from a job and they still needed health care if they had a family, is that where the individual payment comes into play?
Absolutely, because all individuals, I shouldn't say all, but most Americans are required to purchase health care coverage starting next year. And if they're not able to obtain coverage through their employer, they have to find it elsewhere. And that's what you hear these healthcare exchanges or healthcare marketplaces popping up a lot, because the individuals will be able to go to those marketplaces to obtain insurance.
And I mean, I know that you had said that there are certain regulations and rules for the employer. Does that also, are there some provisions set aside for individuals as well, that there's some rules that people have to follow before they can just go to a healthcare exchange and purchase this insurance?
No. Generally, the health insurance exchange or the marketplace is supposed to be a very user-friendly option for individuals to obtain coverage. It's going to be an online forum set up kind of like a website where individuals can pick the level of coverage they like, the cost out of pocket that they're going to be required to pay, and a number of other factors, like if their physicians participate with a certain plan versus another. But it's supposed to be very user-friendly, very accessible to all individuals.
And how do you think that this will affect the actual coverage that's given? Do you think that because it's a little bit more expensive for these employers and possibly for an individual, the quality of the coverage may not be as good as it was before?
I think the quality of coverage will remain unchanged. In Michigan, healthcare providers have an outstanding reputation for providing quality care. But there are going to be some cutbacks, I think, on an individual basis that individuals won't be willing to pay for as much coverage out of pocket as they would be if, for example, the employer was paying for it.
Right, so we might see a little bit of change. I know that people may be cut back on prescription medications and maybe aren't getting those annual checkups and screenings simply because of the out-of-pocket expense.
Absolutely, and that's why wellness programs are going to start becoming more available to employees and more of an incentive to become healthier.
Right, maybe some gym memberships and other, is that what you're referring to?
Exactly.
Okay, and in terms of going forward, our next segment we're going to be talking a little bit more about the deadlines and all of those things. So what are some of those if you just want to preview a little bit?
Yep, well, like I said, January 1, 2014 is the date that should be marked on everybody's calendar. And we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing some of the businesses in northern Michigan facing, as well as some of the things that you can do to prepare for that deadline.
Right, exactly. And then really quick, we had touched on the penalties as well. So what are some of those? I'm sure that there's kind of a slew of them, as there's a slew of everything with this law, but what are some off the top of your head that you can just kind of preview for people? You know, what could a business be facing if they chose not to abide by this?
Well, for the businesses, if they don't offer any coverage to their employees and are considered to be a large employer, they may face a penalty of up to $2,000 per full-time employee.
Wow.
And from an individual perspective, it's a stepped-up scale for every year. In 2014, it's $95 per person for failing to obtain insurance. In the next year, it's $325 per person, and then in 2016, it's $695 per person.
Wow, so it's certainly something that there's some harsh penalties and some harsh financial burden if you choose not to abide by this.
Yes, absolutely.
And are these federal regulations?
Yes.
Or state, federal?
Yep, these are all federal statutes. The regulations are still forthcoming, so guidance is coming out from the Internal Revenue Service, Department of Labor, almost every week.
Okay, wow, so certainly a lot of information to digest. But if you guys stay tuned, our next segment we will be talking more about Northeast Michigan specifically. What can people expect and what could they prepare for? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Insights, everybody. Now we're going to be talking about Northeast Michigan specifically. How will people and businesses here be affected by the healthcare reform laws? All right, and joining me again is Mindy Johnson. So, Mindy, we've talked last segment at length about the different provisions, the different types of coverage, and how that would affect individuals versus employers. But all in all, the common theme is January 1, 2014. That's when this happens.
Absolutely, yep.
And so in Northeast Michigan, how are people preparing for this? How you visited earlier this month to the Chamber of Commerce and spoke with some businesses, and what was the general theme of that conversation?
Well, when I spoke to the Chamber, it was an educational piece just to inform people what Obamacare, what healthcare reform is all about. What we're finding so much is that there's so much miscommunication and misinformation about what the law actually requires, that people really have to start with the basics, become educated on the mandates before they're even able to determine how their business is going to respond. So that's what my presentation to the Chamber was on. The Chamber is also doing a phenomenal job. They're offering a 5-part series of presentations solely focused on healthcare reform. My topic was the first, which gave a general overview of the requirements of the healthcare reform law. The next presentation, I think, was one that's concentrated on insurance and the type of coverage that individuals have to obtain and employers have to offer to their employees. They are also doing another segment on healthcare providers and how healthcare reform is going to affect the practice of medicine. A fourth segment is on the topic of tax and enforcement.
Okay.
So what the effect of the healthcare reform law is going to be on people. And then the fifth segment is going to be kind of a summary of everything else and talking about updates.
Wow. So really, I mean, like you said, it's something that's very involved, something that you really can't cover in one session. Obviously, it has to be broken up because there's so many components.
Absolutely. And so many different types of businesses that are affected, from your general business owner with X number of employees to healthcare providers to insurance agencies. It covers so many different industries.
Definitely. And do you think that it's something that people, like you said, people should be educated about, but what do you think is the harmful effect of just kind of sitting back and, maybe waiting until December to take a step?
Well, there are a lot of things that can be done now to prepare for next year, and if you don't do them, you're kind of behind the 8 ball. You may face penalties starting with the imposition and assessment of certain taxes next year, like we discussed in our previous segment, which may have been avoided if you took some action this year to really plan and get prepared.
And who are the types of people and types of organizations that a business owner should be talking to?
Definitely accountants and CPAs, maybe third-party administrators if you do have assistance in administrating your healthcare plans, insurance agents, attorneys, any other advisors that you may have.
Right, and businesses typically have these things in their back pocket, but what about somebody who's an individual? Are these the same kinds of people that they could be speaking to be informed?
Probably not.
Okay.
Now, with the Health Insurance Exchange, there are people called facilitators who are going to be paid for by the exchange and be available to individuals to answer questions about eligibility, coverage under the health insurance exchange plans, and the availability of certain tax credits and subsidies. Now, the new regulations with regard to facilitators just came out within the last week.
Wow.
So their role is still undefined, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But there is an opportunity for individuals to get answers if they wait just a little bit longer.
Right. They could certainly kind of, like you said, not be behind the 8 ball necessarily, but also not be, I guess, floundering when December rolls around.
Exactly. And education is key.
Right.
And getting as much information, credible information, that you can now to prepare for next year is going to be essential.
Definitely. Now, Michigan is a big state, obviously. You're from here yourself. So I feel like there are different sorts of businesses, different types of people in all the different places in Michigan. And so specifically to Northeast Michigan, what do you think are some of the things that people are facing here?
Well, like you said, business owners throughout Michigan are facing some of the same issues. When I was speaking to the Alpena Chamber of Commerce, some of the similar issues that I've been hearing have come up, and they include just a determination of full-time employee status. As I mentioned, I think in the first segment, full-time employees are defined as those who work an average of 30 hours a week or more. That's a big surprise to people.
Right.
And Alpena business owners and employers are facing those same issues, whether they are going to offer coverage to those people and the level of coverage.
Right.
But I think also with Northern Michigan, you encounter a lot of employers who employ seasonal workers in the entertainment, travel, maybe even restaurants industries. You
and even maintenance work as well, the different types of snow maintenance versus spring maintenance.
Absolutely. You encounter a lot of variable hour employees and employees who work only at certain times of the year. And there is an exception for employers of seasonal workers that should be looked at by people in those different industries, because it may offer additional exceptions to the employer mandate and some planning opportunities.
Right, okay, so it's certainly, again, going back to the educational component, it's kind of a person's on their own merit to really look into this, not something they can expect the government to provide them answers for.
That's right. And the answers that are provided by the government come in many, many, many pages of regulations.
And probably a lot of jargon that people aren't necessarily familiar with on a daily basis, as an attorney would be.
Yep, legalese all the way.
Okay, and so what are some of the things, so you talked to the chamber, how many people were in attendance at that meeting?
At the meeting I was at, they had about 80 to 85 people attend.
Wow, so this is clearly an issue that people in this area are very concerned about, just based on the fact that so many attended.
Yes, and I think there is a lack of information in many communities.
Right.
And so it's really helpful to really seize on the opportunity and take advantage of the educational opportunities.
Definitely. And now some individuals, so this is just a chamber event, so it was chamber business people who were attending. But for an individual, what are some resources that you think maybe they could look into in addition to the facilitators? Like you said, online, maybe there could be something, and there might be some legalese, but perhaps there's, I believe that you had directed me to a website since I'm not a legal individual. Yeah,
the government's website is very user-friendly, I think, for individuals. It's www.healthcare.gov. The Internal Revenue Service Their website is fairly good. Department of Labor has a fairly good website, and the Department of Health and Human Services as well.
Okay, so there's clearly a lot of opportunity and really some different types of advice that you could be getting from different people. So it's not kind of a one-stop shop. You do have to do a little bit of research.
Yeah, I think the best source for people with a very basic understanding of healthcare reform is the healthcare.gov website, because it covers so many different facets of the law.
Definitely. And now moving forward, if you guys stay tuned for our third and final segment of Insights, we will be talking about implementation in the future. January 1, 2014 is when all of this takes place, but what could people do now to really prepare? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Insights, everybody. Now in this third and final installment of healthcare reform, we will be talking about what the future holds for people and what we can expect after January 1 of 2014. So Mindy, that's it. What can people expect after January 1 on January 2nd?
A lot of confusion.
Okay.
As we talked about, there's a lot of misinformation and miscommunication out there right now. And in order for the government to get all these programs rolling, we need so much more instruction. And I'm not quite sure we will receive that. But regardless, that deadline has been set, and we'll have to see if it's pushed back. But if everything goes into effect, people will be scrambling because they're going to be faced with those penalties starting January 2nd if need be.
Right.
And so they're going to have to need to know how they respond and where to go for to answer their questions.
Right. So, I mean, could it be as quick as, I guess, these changes taking effect as, you know, one day I can go to the doctor and I just give them my insurance card, and the next day I could go and hand them the card and that wouldn't work? Is that kind of the I guess, the basic understanding of that, or is there more to that?
There's a little bit more to that than that. If you have coverage, it's not going to stop just because January 1 comes. But the law definitely focuses more on the people who don't have insurance and the fines that they may be faced with if they don't get it.
Okay. And so could that be even an individual who doesn't have insurance? The government could find somebody, and could it be somebody who doesn't have insurance because they can't afford it to begin with? Or is this the kind of people that we're talking about as well?
Yes, to a certain extent. And there are certain exceptions for people who can't afford coverage because there are tax credits and subsidies that they may be eligible for. But I think the primary thrust is going to be on the business owners,
right,
and the requirement that they offer coverage to their full-time employees.
Right, and so leading up to January 1, we might see some layoffs, some readjusting, some realignments internally with some corporations.
Yeah, definitely. Employers cutting hours of their employees, laying off staff, and stopping the healthcare coverage that's provided.
Right, simply to stay afloat themselves, perhaps.
Yeah, and what they're looking at is just the financial implications. That aside, when we talk about financial implications and penalties, employers are also going to have to look at the non-financial factors. What type of culture do they want their company to have? Do they want to offer this wonderful health benefit to their employees because they have in the past? Do they want to make sure their employees stay with them by offering coverage instead of going to a competitor who offers better coverage? And I think they also have to look at the goodwill of the company within the community. How is one company going to look if they offer coverage and another one in the same industry doesn't offer coverage?
Exactly. And I think a lot of people will be hiring people like you to kind of explain that, walk them through that process. Is that something that you guys have noticed over at your firm?
Absolutely. I would say especially within the last month or so, because of those planning opportunities in 2013, we're getting a lot of clients calling saying, help.
Yes, exactly. Just offer your advice, offer your time.
Exactly. They open their books, show us their employee numbers, the hours that they're tracking, and we help them form strategies to respond to this and avoid the penalties if necessary, or if they are willing to provide coverage, we help them deal with some of the financial aspects of that.
Okay, and we touched a little bit about after the law becomes effective, some of these penalties will go into effect, but it's not so black and white as it'll work one day, it won't work another day. So again, what do you think people can really do to be informed of all of these things and not go to the doctor because they're afraid that they won't be able to receive any treatment?
And I think that's maybe one of the myths of healthcare reform. We've had a lot of questions from people saying, well, if this person doesn't have insurance and they go to the doctor, who's going to be responsible for paying for that? Well, that individual will be.
Yeah.
And the government won't receive that burden as an additional tax that they pass on to everyone else. But the employees do have to be educated, the individuals, have to be educated on what their responsibilities are.
Right.
It's not going to be free healthcare for everyone. they'll still be responsible for it, and they should understand how they have to go about obtaining coverage.
Right, which is another myth. I think a lot of people think that Obamacare means free healthcare for everybody, no matter if you're working and you're employed or if you're not and you already are receiving some benefit from the government as well. But as you just said, that's really not the case.
That's correct, yep.
Right. And so we talked a little bit about before some of the resources people can go to, some online resources. But here in Alpena, what do you think people could really be doing to stay educated and maybe around here somebody they could talk to in case they can't drive to Grand Rapids to come see you?
Well, there's so much information available on the web where they can look it up. The Chamber is a wonderful avenue to get the information, and I think the series they're doing is really admirable. We're seeing that a lot more up here than even in West Michigan.
Wow.
So they're doing a fantastic job with that.
In Northern Michigan specifically you're talking about?
Yep, Alpena in particular, the Chamber of Commerce. But aside from that, the news is another great resource. I mean, you guys are doing a wonderful job of helping people stay educated as well, and staying on top of all the changes that they see.
Exactly. And I think, too, up here, we do cover a lot of county meetings, some city meetings, and that's been a big topic as well because the cities and counties are also businesses in a sense. They have employees that they do provide coverage for. So I guess speaking not just from, you know, a mom and pop store versus a large corporation, but also these kinds of entities as well. They're kind of dealing with this, too.
Absolutely. It's the governmental entities, nonprofits, in addition to your regular traditional employers.
Right. And especially, do you think that this is something that you've seen too, maybe some of the startup businesses? Have you noticed just any trends in that realm of people maybe not taking that leap of faith because of these different changes?
To a certain extent, yes. More so, we were seeing people keep their employee numbers down to try to avoid some of the requirements. But that can be a strain on a startup business too, that once they start growing, they're going to need the staff and the help.
Right, and also just economically speaking, not just in Michigan or Alpena, but in a grander sense, the not hiring, that could really affect some of our college graduates, some students, and some other people who maybe have been laid off from a job and are trying to find other work.
Yeah, it's going to have a huge economic effect.
Right, a lot of ripple effects as well.
And the decisions that are being made by the businesses are the decisions that's going to affect everyone else in the community.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Mindy, for joining me here today on Insights, and I hope that everybody learned something out there. And as Mindy said, if you have any further questions, you can feel free to contact herself, the Chamber of Commerce, or perhaps go online to find some more information. Stay tuned to Insights next Sunday at 11:30.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.